This is Linux in Laws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35, or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. Welcome to Linux in Laws, Season 1, Episode 89. Martin, how are things?
Yeah, things are great in this cold December. How about you?
I can't complain. Martin has.
Or is it November? I've lost the
exactly.
plot.
Martin has recently discovered time travel. So,
yeah.
In what century are you in, Martin? I'm just wondering. 19th, 18th?
No.
Electrical power is around, right? So otherwise you wouldn't be joining.
This is true. Well, you can if you've got battery-powered laptops, right? So,
do you have some Celts in front of you shouting in a language that you do not understand? I reckon it's raining, so it doesn't make a difference.
No,
because it's still England.
That's a good question, though. If you were to time travel, which era would you go to first? Yeah.
I reckon I would go to 2050 just to see what has happened in between.
No, I meant in the past. Yeah.
You can only travel back.
Well, no, I'm not saying you can only travel back, but if you were to choose your first going back in time experience, what time would you go to? Or people would you meet or stuff like that? Yeah.
I would go back to the 80s, I suppose, when I was kind of studying.
1980s to tell yourself all the things.
Exactly.
Don't do this.
No, I mean, for the sole reason, life was much easier then. I just had finished high school.
Yeah.
And I just was kind of starting to study for my first degree, as in what is now known as a bachelor in computer science. But you didn't have all these hassles like modern life, being a true adult and all the rest of it, because life was just easier. Let's put it this way.
No responsibilities, eh? Yeah.
Not that many, exactly. No failed marriages, no kids, nothing.
Multiple marriages.
at least not on the cards, anyway.
You never told me about the multiple ones.
Oh man, there are many things you don't know about me. No, jokes aside, I've never been married, which nicely actually leads us to the topic of today's discussion, namely free, libre, and open source software and marriages, as in marriage counseling. I'm almost tempted to say. Now, Martin, as I just said, I've never been married, so this is a priest basically giving marriage advice, more or less. A concept that has been tried and tested for at least a couple of last, millennia or something?
Yeah.
I mean, the church has always been at the very forefront of marriage counseling, although, the Catholic Church now, of course. But given the fact that priests were never really allowed to marry, this probably is a very similar situation, but this is not about kind of the Catholic Church, but rather marriage in general. So, Martin, between the two of us, you have been married for probably the longest time, right?
I don't know, but yeah, it's possible. Who knows?
Longer than me, anyway. No,
okay.
I mean, so let's before we go into discussion, let's define a marriage in general.
Yeah.
People, regardless of sex, getting together for a reason? Maybe not.
Well, the getting together bit is not necessarily related to the marriage, right? That's why not everybody gets married. The marriage is really the official, let's say, legal status that is attached to that togetherness.
Yes, but that goes back to ancient times, right? It's just it's not. I mean, today it's probably more formality, like a couple of centuries or maybe even longer times ago. But I think the original idea was basically to formalize the relationship in front of the community. Maybe not.
Yeah. Well, obviously I can't talk about the past, but in current day, it gives you certain legal rights, right? Or legal rights. You have the the simple fact, why do people get married and green cards and stuff like that in the US, for example? Those kind of things. You get legal status in the country. Your children are automatically registered as your children, and as stuff like that. It comes with a bunch of laws and regulations around it, right? That's
true. But I'm almost tempted to say, in contrast to say 500 years ago, and I'm really talking about Europe now, where
you must really lend me this time travel machine, because around 500 years ago, I'm afraid.
Just turn the dial. No worries. No, I'm going back a little bit. And this is a sign of changing times as well. About 500 years, I'm led to believe, because I wasn't around, but maybe you can double check that after the episode.
Yeah.
And arranged marriages were quite the done thing, in terms of you getting together with somebody that you didn't necessarily choose yourself, because somebody else made that decision for you. And I reckon if current law is anything to go by, this is still the done thing in other parts of the world, like, for example, India.
Yeah, it's certainly something that, well, even in the UK, right? It happens, yes.
You're referring to the fact that Charles and Camilla was an arranged marriage?
No, the other one, I think.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they both come from failed marriages, no? I mean, Charles was married to Diana before, if I'm not completely mistaken. History books may be a source of information here.
Correct.
And Camilla was married before to some duke or something, no?
Yeah, well, someone else anyway. Yep.
But now that Diana, unfortunately, is dead, Camilla isn't. I'm not too sure about the duke, if he's still around or not, that Camilla was married to in the first place.
No, I don't keep up with royal gossip like you do, I'm afraid.
I see. Time travel or not, exactly. No, jokes aside, I mean, the point that I'm getting at, and before we completely lose our last listener who's wondering what the heck is going on.
Yes. Well, it says in the title anyway, right? What's going on? They were warned by that.
Indeed. But the thing is that people come together for a reason in terms of marriages and relationships in general. Normally it's mutual attraction, if not arranged stuff. I mean, what attracted to you? I mean, you have been married, what, at least once, right?
Yeah, at least once, yes.
Okay, so what attracted to you, if that's not a too-personal question?
Probably is too personal, isn't it, really? Yeah. Can't get any more personal than that.
Fair enough. Yeah. So you don't have to tell the truth, but I mean, I reckon there was a reason, and it wasn't taxes, why you got married in the first place.
Well, that's the difference, right? If you get together with someone, that's for potentially different reasons than doing the actual marriage part, right? Because then you're just legalizing the status, so to speak. But yeah, if we're talking about general relationships, there are clearly reasons to get together. Yes.
Indeed, whether it's money, whether it's status, whether it's actually love.
I think money is probably more in the past, isn't it? Yeah.
Is it? I mean, that's a very interesting question. But I reckon, depending on the cultural
unless
circle,
we're talking millionaires or something.
Exactly. I mean, there have been certain women of certain hair colors that have been known to get married with men way older than themselves. So I reckon the procreational factor wasn't exactly high on the list.
Yeah.
There was this, I can't remember the name, Lisa, something like that, who married that ultra-rich Texan dude from Texas. Can't remember the name. Links may not be in the show notes. So
maybe you've been watching too much Dallas.
No, that was I think in the 90s or something like that. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So it doesn't have to be. Always.
I think I know what you mean now. There's a smallish guy. Yeah. Yes. Anyway.
Look. Very very old, almost on the brink of.
Yeah, there's a certain age difference in the
exactly.
Okay. Yep.
And I mean, so the motives are quite different, I reckon, or diverse, not different, but rather diverse, that why people get together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ideally, it would be kind of mutual attraction and what most people know as then true and deep love, which manifests itself in a good marriage that lasts forever. Unfortunately, I've yet to come across a marriage that doesn't have, or a relationship in general, that doesn't have its ups and downs.
I guess so, yeah.
I mean, I've been in many
relationships
myself.
Also witnessed by the divorce rate, right? Which is
very, very much so. Yeah, so it's probably a good question why getting married in the first place still makes sense, and at this point in time, or this present day, or whatever.
Yeah, well, it's legal status, isn't it?
Legal status, yeah, I reckon so. But at the end of the day, it's just a formalization of a relationship. I fully agree. But at the end of the day, basically, as I said, I've yet to see the relationship, marriage or not, that doesn't have its ups and downs. And I reckon a good relationship boils down to the fact how you handle, especially these downs, these dips.
Probably, or yeah. Interesting question.
I mean, how do you handle crisis in a relationship? You can split up, fair enough. You can try to resolve these differences.
Yeah.
Or you can simply choose to ignore them.
Yeah.
That's an option too.
Yeah, that's good. Well, those are probably the three options. Yeah, very good.
And of course, the route you take determines the outcome. I suppose.
Well, yes. Yeah. Well.
Now, for these listeners who are still listening,
yes.
and
I still we were getting onto open source.
What the heck this has to do with open source? The reason, and this is the rationale behind this somewhat more philosophical episode than usual. Open source communities are not that different, I suppose, because if you take a close look out,
probably more people involved, right?
Well, true, but then you see this. I mean, if you take a look at native tribes, they do not necessarily have this notion of a monogamy, what's called monogamy, right? As in, you can be in a relationship with more than one person, whatever. So, I
thought you were getting onto open source.
Well, I am, but
I'm still waiting.
I'm just trying to kind of bridge to that context. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay.
Okay.
Leaving Martin's very traditional views of personal relationships aside. No, jokes aside, people. No, I mean, open source communities I'm almost tempted to say somewhat similar, because people get together for a reason. As we just discussed, marriages is kind of like status, money, attraction, ideally attraction, and just attraction. Or the pressing needs, and people will probably crucify me for this, especially women, to procreate after at a certain age. Jokes aside, people, that was just a very politically incorrect remark. So it may or may not be edited out. It doesn't matter anyway. But Martin is laughing, which is a good thing. Anyway, so jokes aside. No, I mean, why do people get together in the open source community? Because they want to brag about the code that they wrote.
Well, it's kind of how does an open source project start? Right, it's probably the beginning is where someone gets annoyed with a piece of software and decides to do its own modifications or start its own project. Like a good example is Redis, right? Where Salvatore,
going back to the old code base.
Well, Salvatore he wrote Redis because there wasn't a piece of software out there that did what he needed it to do, so he wrote it himself.
Memcache came close, but didn't fit the bill completely correct.
So yeah, so that's how it starts. Then what happens is that when a project is successful, other people start using it, and they find, oh, this will be a nice feature, or that will be a nice feature. So it being open source, let's build it ourselves as well.
And they contribute back, exactly. So
or fix some bugs or whatever it is, right? That's
So not that undissimilar to relationships, because many people that I know actually are not in a relationship and want to change that status because they don't, for example, like living alone anymore.
Right.
Or are just attracted to another person. Of course, the tricky thing is basically if they're in a relationship and then come across that other person, what happens then? Which is more attractive than the current one.
Sorry, you lost me there. Say that again.
Say if you're married and if you come across that other person and you feel immediately attracted to that other person way more than to your current
I see.
spouse, what happens then?
Well, there's two options.
You can fork the relationship, right? Maybe not.
You can or you can't. Yeah, or you don't. That's the option. Yeah.
No, jokes aside, I reckon, well, so much for the dissimilarities, but I reckon it comes down at the end of the day, and you see this in many open source projects as well, how you handle troughs. I mean, handling peaks in a relationship is easy. You just go with the flow.
They don't actually need handling.
Exactly. I mean, if people contribute code, if that code is excellent, if that code has a certain level of quality, it's bug-free or almost bug-free anyway, and it integrates nicely, it doesn't have any continuous integration, continuous deployment issues. So also, if it all goes swimmingly, all fine. But what happens if somebody thinks that he's more important than the other people in the project, or if somebody just delivers crap, doesn't live up to timelines and that sort of thing? So, what do you do if a crisis kicks in?
Well, as we talked about earlier, you have to do one of three things, right? Either you kick them out of the project, or you do your counselling bit, as you call it, and but the other thing is most projects are regulated to some degree, right? They have for that reason, some standards, some rules that people need to adhere to contribute to the project. And that's why there is a project structure normally.
Some projects do, some don't. For example, Debian has a very, or Arch has a very rigorous project structure with steering committee and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But when Salvatore started to create Redis, there was no such thing.
Well, yeah, it was just him on his own. So, but then when it grows, they do have to do something about it, right? Indeed.
Very much like families, right? I mean, you start out as two people, then you have kids, but these kids need guidance at stages, I suppose.
Well, they probably disagree with that, but yeah.
And this is part of a process called growing up, Martin.
Yeah. Indeed.
If you recall this, having been a kid not too long ago yourself.
It is quite handy. It is quite handy. Yeah.
Yes. So, no, I mean, and I reckon code bases undergo that same life cycle. And sometimes they split. FFmpeg and libav probably being the best example.
Right.
Or OpenWRT and later. I don't know if you're familiar with the details. Some people really got fed up and forked the whole thing. But the community said, "No, look, people, what you're doing here is a bad idea." Again, not that dissimilar to greater families coming down on a couple who's just basically decided that a divorce may be a good thing.
Yeah, okay. No, that's a good example, yeah.
As a matter of fact, I can recall a case, details of course will be omitted, from my greater family, where exactly that happened. After 10, 15 years, a couple decided, distant relations now, decided, I think, and there weren't any kids involved, but I'm not too sure anyway, it doesn't matter, that they wanted to split, but the family got together, as in the greater family, and said, "Now look, of course you can do this, but here are the reasons why you shouldn't." And for them it worked out because they got back together again. I think now they're dead, if I'm not completely mistaken. But again, you're talking distant relations now, as in way older than I am. But as far as I know, they happily lived ever after. But wouldn't have been there that decisive discussion with the greater family, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Yeah, so no, that's a good example. All sorts of things happen in open source projects for sure.
So the bottom line is, people.
Do we know of any projects that have, let's say, a procedure for dealing with issues in a?
Oh yeah, does the term code of conduct ring a bell?
Well, that's really it, the rules she's trying to stick by. But then, what happens if there is someone doesn't, right? That's
normally, and it's funny because the LAG that I'm a member of just is in the process of authoring or extending actually their what's the word? It's not constitution, but their rules and regulations is probably the best word. And we are currently thinking about actually imposing a code of conduct, because of recent events in the community. Let's put it this way. But normally a code of conduct would incorporate an escalation procedure.
Right.
So you know what's going to happen if you face a crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much like every decent prenup agreement would do, no? As a prenup agreement is not just where the money goes, but rather what happens if you disagree. Maybe not. But I mean, Martin, you're absolutely spot on. Because, okay, you can. I mean, normally this is, of course, not formalized in a marriage or something, or in a relationship in general, but you deal with it on a case-by-case basis. But the relationships that I know have, I wouldn't say formal, and these work. Relationships basically of people that have been together for quite some time, have, of course, faced crises in one fashion or another, but always have found ways with dealing with them. Now, it's probably not as formal as an escalation procedure in an open source project, but it normally works out for them because otherwise they wouldn't be together anymore, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Yep.
I mean, I reckon you don't have a formal escalation procedure in your relationship.
No.
Isn't it written down somewhere where everybody can go to and say, "No, look, you're doing it the wrong way."
Yeah.
I mean, similar to.
But yes, you are right. I mean, a lot of projects are organized in a different way. Actually, that's very true.
And of course, relationships also can be toxic. Like some open source communities can be toxic, or are being perceived as being toxic. I mean, Linus himself said that he's coming from a dysfunctional background. Links may be in the show notes if I can dig this up. But the thing is, the Linux kernel community still works.
Right.
Peaks and troughs aside. But people basically draw the corresponding consequence because, for example, if memory serves correct, Linus went into a hiatus after an event that wasn't pleasant for the community because somebody, it may have been even some steering committee or some, I'm not sure if Mr. Greg Crow-Hartman was involved. I don't know, but somebody said, "Now look, Linus, it might be a good idea if you temporarily step back, take some time to reflect," because Linus at that stage was known to be very outspoken with his comments on certain on certain pieces of code that people contribute to the kernel.
Right.
And it's got to some degree that I think a lady from Intel left as a maintainer that code base because she couldn't deal with the toxic remarks coming from the ultimate guru in charge of the overall maintenance of the kernel.
Yeah, but that's I guess it comes down again to what's his name, project structure, right? Some projects like Ubuntu, where they have coding standards and things like that. So it's more regulated through a, let's say, something that's been thought about before, and let's say maybe call it a committee, but rather than a single guy, right? Yeah.
So the bottom line, if you're in a miserable marriage or otherwise relationship, basically formulate your escalation procedure, I suppose. Martin, would that help? I'm asking.
That's a good question. No, I don't think that's necessary. Yeah.
But I mean, going back to the previous example now, but I know quite a few parents actually who have, one family comes to mind particularly, who have written down a list of how things work in a family, and they've put this on the kitchen cupboard for the kids to read and memorize. I'm a dad.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay. Makes more sense.
Whether this works is a different matter.
Yeah,
most of the kids choose to ignore this list.
That's what they do. Yes. Mm-hmm.
But again, in theory, it should work.
Yeah. Well, it should work. It probably makes the parents feel better. But
yes. And of course, I mean, you cannot really kick out kids from a family like you can kick out misbehaving contributors from a project. So I reckon this is where the similarity ends. But in general, the parallels are there, and I reckon both. What's what I'm looking for? Both not communities, but rather both structures. Is that what I'm looking for? Can learn from each other. Because as the last half an hour, maybe 25 minutes has shown, there are certain parallels where actually things from the other part can be applied to your partner, whatever, or to your relationship, and vice versa. So if you're in a stuck relationship, take a look at how successful projects on GitHub are managed. Martin, we should probably actually fork Linux in-laws to a general guidance counseling podcast where people can send questions and then we deal with them.
Like those radio shows that you used
like these radio shows that were arranged about 40, 30 years ago, where people could simply call in and say, "No, look, I've just murdered my wife. What should I do?"
Something like that. Excellent.
Like, go to the police, commit suicide, or simply flee. I have 3 options, right?
Oh, it's probably the 4th one is to bury the body, right, or something like that.
That would be ignoring it, yes. Indeed. I mean, these shows were the rage back in the 90s now.
Yeah, I guess so.
You didn't have them actually in Germany, but it was really, and the nutters who would call in, this was just amazing. I mean, not too short, not too far off from murders, from really serious stuff. But I reckon most of them were posers. I don't know.
But yeah, again, there's a similarity there that just happens by email, right? In your open source projects.
That's true, yeah. So people don't call in anymore, but send me or actually do pull requests with vicious remarks in them.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts? Apart from how we can monetize this guidance podcast?
Well, I don't know. Monetizing any podcast is not that straightforward.
Indeed. That's probably the reason why we haven't monetized Linux in-laws yet. So people, if you have any ideas, the email address is feedback@linuxinlaws.eu.
We can have an episode about it after it's been successful. Yeah.
About these 2 emails that people sent in about how to monetize this format. Okay. So bottom line is
project,
exactly. So bottom line is, people, if you're in a tricky relationship, take a look at GitHub. People, if you're contributing to GitHub and you're not happy, take a look at relationships, especially the ones that work. If you know any relationships that work, sometimes people do, sometimes people don't.
Yes, yeah, it's but in reality, I think statistically, the most I don't know, 2/3 of relationships are doomed to fail, right? Or doomed to fail. They fail.
That's 66%. Okay, that's a lot.
I think so. Yeah.
So why is that? Do you think? I mean, just kind of closing remarks.
Good question.
Incompatibility, infatuation early on.
I think. Well,
money
could be one. Probably expectations, maybe. And why was the divorce rate so much lower, like let's say a century ago? Because it's a lot easier these days, right?
Yes, and I think it goes down to I'm almost tempted to say economic situation, because a century or two ago, you had a totally different outset. So I reckon people had the same differences as they have today, but because of circumstances, you didn't split that easily.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That would be my take on the situation.
No.
Whether this now, as in today's circumstances, are a good or a bad thing in that regard, especially if kids are involved, good question. I don't know. I think the jury's still out on that. I mean, at the one time, it's easier to separate, but if you have kids, things just become more complicated, I suppose.
Yeah. Yes, so there's a handy Linux in-laws piece of advice.
Yes,
think twice before you have children.
There you go. Yes, just start to play the lotto, because you won't have any kids that will pay your bills once you get old, but not to worry about that.
Yeah.
And with these words of infinite wisdom,
you heard it here first. Yeah.
Yes. we've almost come. We do have come to the boxes. So Martin, what's your pick of the week?
Let's see. Pick of the week for me. I'm going to go with an open source project this time.
What a change, Martin! How come?
No, I don't. Well, it's mainly because every time I use it, I'm just surprised by it.
Just because this show is about open source software, you are actually choosing an open source project.
Yeah, no, it's just it's one of those ones where some projects or pieces of software are it's really well architected and written and implemented and so on. Yeah.
Let me guess, it's not what's it called these days? Windows Real Time, because I think that's open source. I may be wrong though.
Is it? Okay. I don't know. No, it's RabbitMQ.
What a surprise! In case people didn't understand it, Martin is talking about RabbitMQ. Details, of course, with the show notes.
Yes.
So, and why did you? I mean, just because it's well architected. It's written, I think, in Erlang to some extent, right?
It is, yeah. Which is a funny language, but yeah. No, it's just the I think it's a very active community in terms of the way that the software is evolving, things being added to it. The clients are very well maintained for lots of different programming languages, including Rust and stuff like that. It's just every time I use it, I find out something new about it that makes it even more usable. And it's not like a like a Redis where you put some data in, you get it out. There's a lot more to it with.
No, it's interesting because do you know what Erlang stands for, by the way?
I don't know what Erlang stands for.
Yes.
Is it an abbreviation? Well, it's
yes, it is.
I'm assuming the lang stands for language, but
spot on, Martin. Spot on.
It should really be ERL, shouldn't it? But yeah.
No, actually, ER stands for Ericsson, because they invented the language in the 80s or late 70s.
Oh, yeah, because of their routers.
Yes, they were looking for. I mean, I just came across this recently when I went to a code review, where somebody showed a piece of Elixir code. Elixir being, of course, the extension of Erlang that is still alive and kicking very much today. And at the time, Ericsson was, and still is, by the way, in the business of selling large kits to telecom companies, like switches that are able to handle a couple of 100,000 or million calls per second simultaneously. Thing is that at the time, there wasn't a proper system language around that, for example, implemented parallelism in a very easy way. You could do it in C, but that was awkward, and still is, by the way. And things like Rust, Golang, and other modern languages that would implement an easy approach to parallelism hadn't been invented yet. So this is the reason why they sat down and wrote this and designed and wrote this language from the ground up that was able to meet the requirements in terms of real-time software. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's fun, and RabbitMQ probably would be the best example. That language and these engines is still very much alive today.
It is.
Unlike Ada or Simula that have fallen by the wayside.
Yes, which were equally from a similar era. Very good.
Absolutely, yeah. So, do you know how many active contributors RabbitMQ has at this point in time?
Well, I do know most of them.
Fair enough.
No, there's a number of main contributors which are more like a handful, right, or a dozen, something like that, that work on the core RabbitMQ server code, and then as I said, the libraries are mainly looked after by the community as such, whereas the core is mainly a handful of people that have been working on that since the beginning, I think.
Not that unlike Redis, where many of, for example, of the language bindings have come from the community, but the core has worked on by Salvatore until more people got involved.
He retired, Well, until he retired.
Well, yes, but then he wanted to venture onto different things. By the way, I think his book has now been published. If I'm not completely mistaken, yes.
Okay.
Links maybe in the show notes, depending.
Depending if it's been published or not, yeah.
No, I think it's a sci-fi novel originally written in Italian or something.
That must be translated as well, right?
I'm sure it can be found on GitHub or not. I don't know. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. So, I mean, that was at least.
Was that your pick of the week? No, you haven't read
it. No. I'm coming to my pick of the week in a minute. No. I mean, that was basically the reason, at least the official reason, why Salvatore moved away from the project, I suppose. All these years back. That was 2020, something like that, right?
It's not that long ago, but still.
Now coming to my pop.
Yes.
I'm doing a Martin now, and I'm actually yes, a Martin Visser, am I right?
Have you changed your previous box?
No, it's actually a TV show, because normally you cover books and TV shows, or movies rather. So I'm doing that now, and it's a TV show called The Company You Keep.
Yeah.
Without giving too much away, what was originally a one-night stand between a member of the mob and a CIA agent or FBI, I can't even recall, that develops into a relationship with all very interesting twists and angles.
Okay.
It's not rom-com by no means, as in it's not a romantic comedy, but if you're interested in a very well-written TV series with lots of plots, subplots, angles, but very well done, because essentially these there has just been the first season. These 10 episodes basically detail what happened afterwards and how these two people help each other, work against each other, and all the rest of it. And that's the kind of very interesting angle to the whole thing. So if you're interested in kind of well-written TV series, that's the one not to miss. And it's only, I think, 10 episodes for the first season or something like this, so it's not a lot.
Right.
And if you're still with us, thank you for listening, and looking forward to delivering another show at some stage to our beloved listenership.
Yes, don't forget the feedback. Yeah.
Don't forget yes. And if you have feedback, the address is feedback at linux.eu, at linuxinlaws.eu. This is the Linux In-Laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Salute Margaret, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.